Alright, so I want to make a video updating everyone. Alberta did not publish numbers yesterday, apparently. Apparently, they're not publishing numbers on Sunday, apparently, going forward. So we have no update, so we don't know how many cases. My guess is that they'll just update the active cases today or later today, like they usually do. They usually update them later in the day, like I don't know, 5, 6 o'clock or whatever. So we'll probably just be able to tell how many there was going back if you just do the math on the active cases. I don't even know if I'll bother doing that, but we'll probably be able to find out. It's going to take longer than normal. But I don't really want to talk too much about the numbers a whole lot anymore because again, it's just same old, same old. I mean, there's nothing of concern at all. Even in Eastern Canada, let alone Western Canada, we should have been open 6 weeks ago, at least maybe at the most 4 or 5. Um, so again, there's nothing really new to change or to talk about. I mean, it's kind of same old, in that the protests and or riots have been going on in the states for, I think we're coming up on 2 weeks, like this week. So I've been saying it for a while now, but if there is not a massive amount of outbreak in the states within by this weekend, then we'll know that it's beyond a fraud. And again, anybody still pretending like we should be worried, that we should have any precautions about reopening aside from very small ones is absolutely insane. You don't believe in science, you don't believe in evidence, you believe in your paranoid, delusional paranoia, basically. And again, it's largely people not watching this. So again, most people watching this already understand, but I'm saying for the people that don't and for the people that know people like that. And again, everybody knows people like that. So um, just keep it in mind. But the problem being is that most people, especially the people on the other side, there's nothing you can say to change their mind. They'll believe whatever the government tells them. You have like again, it's the classic example. Um, no one in Canada under the age of 20 has died from it. Yet you still have these stupid parents that are deathly afraid of sending their kids back to school or to camp or to whatever, but yet nobody, literally nobody, has died. The death rate for the flu is a decent amount higher. I believe the death rate for the flu is even higher for the people in their 20s, but I'm not. Um, so again, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's beyond anti-science, and the take-home point being is that coming out of this, anybody, whenever you're in a debate with someone and they bring up science and evidence, just find out where they were on this. And if they were pro lockdown past late April, early May, you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that those people don't have the foggiest clue what evidence, what science means. They're just tribalists, they're ideologues, they don't care. So that's, I guess, the point I wanted to bring up. But the main thing in the news nowadays is this whole Black Lives Matter, defund the police, all this kind of garbage that's going on. Now there is some positive aspects behind it, but it's largely overshadowed by the negative aspects, if you ask me at least. And this is from Zuby Music, and I've talked about him before, but he says, I do not support Black Lives Matter, never have, never will. Why? Because they only care about the 0.01% of black lives that they can use to push their divisive political agenda. The whole thing is disingenuous BS. A catchy name isn't enough to dupe all of us. Now, he is very right. And this is something that I really can't stand about the people that do this, that you'll point out that it is largely a political movement, and yet they'll ignore you for whatever reason. It's, oh no, we're not, of course you're political. If it wasn't political, then why do the overwhelming majority of people, why is the overwhelming majority of people Democrats? Or in Canada, Liberals or NDP. Like, if it's not political, then you should have just as many people on one side as far as the other side. So of course it's political, or at the very least, somewhat interchangeable. So that's the thing to bring up, is that it's political, and if we could just be honest about it. And the problem with it too is that there's almost no way to, and this is the reason why the problem is getting so bad, is that you can't have a rational conversation that, I don't know, for lack of a better way of putting it, like challenges or points out the elephant in the room without them accusing you of being racist. Like, you can't point out that, hey, um, if you really care, you should be more worried about, single parent households. You should be more worried about the percentage of blacks that don't graduate high school. You should be worried about the amount of people that have kids before they're in a stable relationship or preferably married. All this kind of stuff, and it has nothing to do with racism. So why do they? And again, racism nowadays is a political issue. People like to say, "Oh, no, it's not." It's a political issue, and for the simple reason that you constantly, and they probably don't realize it because they're in such a bubble, but you constantly have people on the left side of the political spectrum that just constantly accuse people that disagree with them of being racist. No matter what they disagree with them, no matter how little they disagree with them, they are a racist. And that is the problem, that you have a very large percent of the population that hears race, not a very large, but um, most people who aren't on the left, I would say, who hear the word racist and they immediately tune you out. Like, oh, you're just, you basically, it's just code for, we don't have an argument. We don't have any way of debunking your argument, so we're going to play the race card. That's what most people hear. And the left doesn't seem to realize that. And at some point, and the problem is that from their point of view, it's that I'm not caring. And again, the problem is that, I mean, the first problem being is that the mainstream media does their best to divide us. We have CBC and we have CNN and MSNBC that literally feed on pouring gas on the fire. That's what they do. And until people stop watching the TV, things aren't going to get much better. Like there's so many things that need to be done, but yeah, like I say, he makes the good point here is that they walk over the massive pile of bodies. I mean, you have 20 or 30 people a week, or sorry, on weekends getting shot in Chicago, but yet not a word, not a peep. But you get one guy killed by a black police officer, and the world needs to end because of that. But what about the 20, 30 people a weekend getting shot in Chicago? And that's just Chicago. Like, again, if you actually care about black lives, then the first thing that these people would be doing, assuming they're black, is take a long, hard look in the mirror, because most of the people, and I'm not saying all of them, because there's plenty of good black people that are speaking up about this, namely Zuby Music, Candace Owens, people like that, that are pointing out, hey, if we want to fix things, we got to take a long, hard look in the mirror, because nobody forced you to vote for the policies that have led to the mess that you're in. You look at most of these cities where they're having all these issues. They're Democratic run cities, Democratic run states, Democratic run everything. You've been voting for those same policies for generations, and look at where it's got you. There's no one pointing a gun to your head and say, um, have a kid with an unstable guy that's going to leave you. There's no one pointing a gun to your head saying that. And the systematic racism, and again, this is the one thing that they always bring up to debunk that, oh, it's systematic racism that we have kids out of wedlock and we don't graduate high school and all. No, that's garbage. That's absolute garbage. It's a lie. It's made up for the simple reason that if you look in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, blacks did not have kids out of wedlock or out of stable relationships nearly as much. I've seen some numbers that show that they did it even less than whites did. And there's no way you can possibly argue with a straight face that blacks receive more racism now than they did in the 1920s and 30s. I mean, segregation exists, Jim Crow, I believe, still exists, and all that stuff. Like, there's no laws on the book that are racist nowadays. There was back then. So you cannot possibly argue that there's more racism now than there was back then. So we only disproportionately have kids out of wedlock and don't graduate high school and all this kind of stuff because more racism. No, that's not the case. It's not true. The only way that could possibly make sense is if there's more racism now than there was 100 years ago, and that's not true. That's not objectively true. So anyway, this is from Jack Montgomery on Twitter. He says Lincoln's statue is vandalized, even worse than Churchill's at the Black Lives Matter protests in London. Lincoln, of course, the president who freed the slaves and got an assassin's bullet in the back of the head for doing it. This still wasn't enough. And again, this is a problem that I talk to a lot of people and they're like, yeah, I disagree, but just let them do their thing and the problem will go away. But that's not the problem. The problem is not going to go away. Ignoring problems just means that the problem's going to get worse. When you ignore problems in your personal life, what happens? The problem usually doesn't just magically go away. Most of the time, it just gets worse. And this is the problem, is that this has nothing to do with racism. It is a political movement. This is just more evidence that it is a political movement, because if it was about racism, why would you deface the statue of the guy who was president when they freed the slaves? Come on. Like, that is one of the um, biggest positive moves for ending racism in American history, arguably the biggest. Um, and and um, and Churchill. This is the guy that when it was one, headed up, defeating the Nazis, or one of the heads. But yet he's a race. Like, again, this has nothing to do with racism. This is a sheerly political agenda. This is a political agenda. Let's stop pretending it's about racism, because if it was about racism, they wouldn't have rioted. They wouldn't be killing black people left and right and center. I mean, I've seen numbers that upwards of 20 blacks have been killed because of this. Um, they wouldn't be doing all this kind of stuff. They wouldn't be defacing Lincoln statues and crap like that. So, again, and this is from Stefan Molyneux. This is something I've said, but I wanted to say it again because a lot of people just don't seem to get this, and I'm tired of I'm personally, and I know people that are tired of being blamed for stuff that they're not responsible for, and they even have been helping to try to fix. Um, so again, Minneapolis City Council votes to dismantle the police department, vows to replace it with a community-based safety model. And Stefan Molyneux says it's so predictable and boring. This will be a complete disaster. Crime rates will skyrocket. They will desperately need the cops back, and the old cops won't want to come back, and everything will be blamed on whites. This is the problem: is that these people continuously support policies that just make their situations worse, and anybody with half a brain can see that, which is why I've lost all respect for people that support this garbage. And guess what happens? The problem doesn't get any better. In fact, it probably gets worse. Guess what happens? Oh, it's white racism. But no, it's not white racism. You've been supporting these policies all along. You overwhelmingly support these policies. I mean, blacks overwhelmingly vote Democrat. They overwhelmingly vote for these policies. So no, you don't get I mean, does someone who's innocent killed by a cop get sympathy? Absolutely, they deserve sympathy. But people that are voting for these policies, no, you don't deserve sympathy, because there's people screaming from the rooftops telling you not to do this kind of stuff, but yet you still insist on doing it. So no. And this is the problem too with these people that just want to ignore it and pretend the problem doesn't exist and it'll just go away. No, it's not going to just go away. The problem, it'll be a temporary quick fix like the Democrats always do. The problem, some new event will spark the problem and it'll start all up again. And the problem is that we didn't fix the problem in the first place, because we can't talk about what's really causing it without being called racist. So, um, yeah, this is also from Zuby Music. This is something he put out about a week ago, but it's something I wanted to talk about because it's something that I've talked about before. And he says, perhaps the USA could eventually split into 2 or 3 countries. If so many people truly can't get along with each other and have diametrically opposed values, then why not? It's not it hasn't happened before. It's common throughout history. Now, again, this is something I've been pointing out for, it seems like it is over a year now when it comes to Canada and the states too. Like, we have sides that just cannot agree, and the problem is political tensions are only getting worse. They're only getting worse, and they're only getting worse because we have one side who refuses to come to the middle more. We have the left is completely going off the deep end, like completely going off the deep end. Um, and it's just making things even worse. Like, and that's the problem too, is that I mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again because I always have new viewers. And that if you're a socialist, or if you're one of these leftists and you actually believed in your political views and your political beliefs, you would be one of the strongest supporters of a Wexit movement, especially if you don't live in Alberta. Um, you would be one of the strongest promoters of a Wexit movement, for the simple reason that the only thing stopping you from getting your socialist utopia is Alberta and Saskatchewan. Because if Alberta and Saskatchewan left, the Conservatives would be an afterthought. They'd be lucky to get third place. The elections in Canada would come down to, and the same thing in the States, is the more quote unquote moderate, which I don't, they're not actually that moderate, um, the moderate lefties and the socialists. That's who elections would come down to. I mean, the Bloc probably would still be in there. I mean, my guess is that the NDP and the Liberals, one of them would go way, way, way left, like literal, we want socialism, borderline communism, and the other one would stay pretty much where they're at, which is already pretty far left. It's just not quite socialist. And that's where elections would be. That's where elections would be. The Conservatives would probably get third, fourth place, and it would be the exact opposite in let's just say Alberta left elections and Saskatchewan. Elections would come down to a more libertarian, um, minarchist party versus the conservatives, the actual traditional conservatives, and you'd have the NDP probably in third. And the reason for that is that if Alberta did leave and they actually implemented some decent policies, and by that I mean the problem with Wexit is that you can't just leave Canada. The problem with that is that the same things would come up down the road because what would happen is we would leave, we would inevitably become more rich, more powerful, and if we don't have strict controls on immigration, on welfare, on free healthcare, on all that kind of stuff, people would recognize that because they always do. I mean, look what's happening in Canada. You have a million people every 2, 3 years coming in from the third world to pillage our resources. Same thing in the States, and inevitably we'd end up with a massive welfare state, and we'd end up right back where we're at. So that's the problem with Canada, or with Wexit, is if we do leave, I would say the government has to run balanced budgets, no free healthcare, no welfare. I mean, balanced budget would be the biggest one because it's impossible to have free healthcare and welfare with a balanced budget, at least unless you spend very, very frugally. Um, or have incredibly high taxes. But I mean, Alberta wouldn't go for that. I don't think anywhere would go for that. And I mean, incredibly high taxes on everybody too. When people think high taxes, it's just high taxes on people making six, seven figures. No, it's high taxes on literally everyone. Um, so that's the thing being is that this is something we should do. We should definitely do. Like I don't, and this is again, it's just proof that most of these leftists do not actually believe in their political causes. Because if they did, they would be fully on board it. They would be fully on board it. But they don't. And the reason why people say, well, why do you think they don't? Well, they don't because if you want socialism, if you want free healthcare, if you want a big giant welfare state like Canada has, you need a base of people that contribute a lot more to the system than they actually get out. And the problem is Alberta, and to a lesser degree Saskatchewan. I mean, Alberta is basically the epitome of contributing a lot more into the system than you get out, both as a province and personally. I mean, you look at one of the reasons why Alberta contributes so much more is that people earn more in Alberta. I mean, the numbers are going down because of the oil and gas, but I mean, 2015, 2000, like, and when the oil boom was happening, Alberta was the highest earning province by quite a bit. So that's why they want to do that. Again, they need to pillage the resources and steal it for themselves. And that's the problem, is that they are stealing. Taking people's money, taking anything against people's will is stealing. And that's the problem. So the last thing I wanted to point out before leaving it, this is from Paul Joseph Watson. He says, "White privilege is amazing. I'm so privileged. I have to virtually every cultural, political, and media institution blame me for all the world's problems and have to have a vicious mob threaten to ruin my life so I don't submit to their brainwashing. So privileged, F off." Now, again, this is the problem that um, first, I mean, for starters, white privilege is a racist term. I mean, it's literally the definition of racism. It's collectively judging people based off their race. Like it's literally textbook definition. In fact, I would say it's even more racist than like calling a black guy a thug or something like that. Now, I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just saying, on average, blacks are more likely to be criminals than pretty much any other race. Um, Whites are not the most privileged race of people. I mean, Jews and Asians both earn more money on average than whites. So the concept of white privilege is more racist than, I mean, calling a random white person without knowing if they're actually privileged, privileged is more racist than calling a random black guy a thug or a criminal because blacks are, it's just basic math. Now, I'm not saying either of those things you should do either one of those things. I don't condone that, but I'm just saying, if you actually are against racism, you would be strongly against the concept of white privilege. And the other thing being too is that, um, if anything, whites receive more racism than pretty much any other race, for the simple reason that Number one, they're the only race of people that I mean, other than maybe Asians as well, but um, there's more whites than Asians in North America, so that's why I'm bringing that up. Is they're the only race of people that it is okay, and literally it is legally okay to discriminate based off their race. Again, um, if the reverse was happening, it'd be the biggest story in the world. I literally know people, and I've personally been told that, yeah, you almost didn't get the. I mean, I literally had a boss tell me that, yeah, the his boss told him to stop hiring, or they needed to hire more minorities, and then the guy told him, "F off, I'll hire who I want." So I almost didn't get my last job because of my race, and I know people who have lost their jobs because of their race and they, being white. I don't know anybody. I mean, I don't know very many minorities, but I don't know any of them, and I know some of them that I can. It's pretty obvious that they are underqualified, at least compared to the other people. So there is definitely benefits of other stuff, and I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to condone racism in any way, shape, or form. I think that the best person for the job is what should happen. The best person for the job when it comes to the university, and everyone who applies, you simply assign them a number. The people with the best grades get in, and the people deciding simply just look at the number. There's no way of telling what their sex is, what their race is, anything, what their name is. Even you just simply let in the people that have the best grades, and that is exactly what Martin Luther King wanted. Judge people on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And the problem is that the modern day Black Lives Matter and the modern day anti-racists do not believe that. They are people that would Martin Luther King would have been diametrically opposed to. So that's the last thing I wanted to point out. So anyway, if you liked the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email. Got links in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. And last couple things as always, check me out on Twitter and check me out on BitChute. All the links are in the description, so you can find them all there.